So, I will never forget the seminary professor who held up this book and said, in the wrong hands, this is a weapon. And then he said, and those wrong hands belong to most Christians. Now, I was in seminary, so I was paying to learn what was in this book, right? And the teacher stood up in front of us and said, in the wrong hands, this is a weapon, and the wrong hands belong to the majority of Christians. What I have learned through many years of opening this book and wanting to throw it against the wall like my other professor did at one point is that we in the church have done a disservice to the people who have come to the churches. We in the church, those of us who they call the ecclesiastical people, those of us who get to wear the great big white robes and all the pretty stoles and get all of that stuff, we have done a disservice to the people in the churches because we have not encouraged them past the 8th grade to open this book. We make those kids go, right? How many parents here have forced their children to go to confirmation? Pastor included. We make our children go and learn these Sunday school lessons. And you know, it's really hard to teach children in Sunday school that perhaps maybe Noah's Ark wasn't really there, but metaphorically we should understand what Noah's Ark meant, right? So we send them to Sunday school, and then we send them to confirmation because we want them to become members of the same churches that we have been members of in our lives. And then we're just like, we're done. At 8th grade, you're done. You don't have to really do anything. Go to youth group and have fun. Don't really think about what is in that book. We'll tell you. And can I just tell you that the ecclesiastical ones among you have enjoyed that privilege of place for many, many eons. The teachers of the word have enjoyed that privilege of place of being the only ones who ever opened this up. As my teacher said, in the wrong hands, this becomes a weapon. I had no clue when I took disciple class myself for the first time. Many of you have heard me tell this story because many of you are disciple students. I had no clue what was in this book when I first took a disciple class. And man, I was going in there to prove to them that there was nothing that they could teach me that was right, because I knew what was right. I knew that this book was a bad thing. Why I even went back to church, I have no clue, except for the fact that the Holy Spirit said, get your children to church so they can go to Sunday school, right? But I went into that disciple class and I started to read, and this is what happened. I had a question, and the teachers of that class let me ask the question. I had never been allowed to ask a question ever before. When it was my confirmation time, I asked the question, who is Jesus? Can you tell me who Jesus is? And I was told, you are not allowed to ask that question. That is not a question that you can ask. So I said, well, okay, I won't tell you what I actually said because that would be sailor-like of me to say that. But I will tell you that I said, if you can't tell me who Jesus is, then I'm not going to do this because I don't know what you're getting me into. Remember, up to this point, I hadn't been allowed to touch this book. I went through my entire confirmation without ever touching this book. And I was told, you can't ask the questions that you have. You can't doubt what is in this book. You can't understand this book any differently than what we tell you how to understand it. And I said, I'm not taking confirmation. And so then, of course, the head priest had to call my mother and tell her that I had one foot in hell and one halfway there, so just forget about me, right? But when I went to disciple class, I asked a question about something that I didn't understand. And the teacher answered my question by saying, What do you think? What is it that you think about this? I never knew I had the privilege to think anything about the Bible except for the fact that something in there was bad about me and I didn't want to know it. The teacher let me ask questions and let me doubt. The teacher, you see, let me talk to God on my own about what was in that book and had no agenda to try and make me do it the way that the teacher wanted me to do it. You see, that reminds me a lot of Jesus. Jesus sat high on that mountain and he said, "Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the ones who thirst and hunger for righteousness. Blessed are the ones who are hurt and mourning." He taught something, but he didn't make the people believe it the way that he believed it. He let them ask their questions. We have other scriptural reference about people asking Jesus questions. Sometimes he says to them, "How thick-headed are you people? Do I have to keep teaching this thing over and over and over again?" But most of the time, he let them come to understand what God was saying on their own through speaking with God about what they had just heard, by deciding whether or not this was something that they could truly become a part of. You see, the church has done some bad things to people by making them believe that if you don't do it the way that we teach you to do this, you are wrong. And it's time, brothers and sisters, for the church to admit that and let people learn. Do you know that Martin Luther, the father of the Reformation that gives us our tradition, do you know that Martin Luther hadn't even read the gospel until he started to break away from the church? Did you know that? He had not even read it. And do you know that Martin Luther was almost put to death because he said everybody should have access to these words? Jesus thought that everybody should have access to the teachings of the kingdom: peace, justice, love, grace, honor, hope, compassion, acceptance. And do you know they put him to death for teaching that? Do you know that Jesus was teaching a way so different from the world that they put him to death because he dared to say that the empire's way was not the way of God? And yet, the church has helped people become part of the empire when they don't allow people to open up this book and read it, when they don't encourage people to open up this book and read it, when they don't help people open up this book and read it. I wanted so much today to come out and say, "Oh, we're so great, we're so wonderful," but I can't do that. As a teacher of the Word, I cannot say that the church has done its best helping us learn. But what I can say is we can change that. We can change what has always been. And we can open up the book and allow the words of life to come out and help us become what Jesus taught us that God already knows that we are: the disciples who follow the way of peace and justice, the disciples who follow the way of love and grace, the disciples who offer those things to other people. You know, when I first started to be around people and we were doing these disciple classes, I began to realize that I was participating in exactly what I thought was wrong. Because a couple disciple groups that I was involved with, they had their own private little t-shirts that would say, "The Spirit will get you" on them. And they would not allow a new person to come into the class because they just weren't up to speed where we all had been. And it was at that point that I began to realize that was what we did not want to do. We do not want to close off the Word. We do not want for people to feel like they're excluded from knowing it the way that we know it. And the only way that we can do that, my friends, is to let people ask their questions, to let people believe that maybe something in here is wrong. Has anybody ever really articulated that there could be something in here that's wrong? No. Because we stick our holy book up there on the altar and we see it as a prop and we don't touch it and we don't open it and we just let other people tell us what's in it. It's time for us to change. It is so beyond time for us to change. We are the people of the Word, and we cannot tell the Word, we cannot offer the Word unless we know what the Word is. And sometimes folks will say, well, I don't have time to know that. I don't have time to do that. I don't have time to do that. How is it that we cannot have time to know what God says to us? Because there's a secret about this book we all need to remember, and that is that it changes. One day you will open it up and you will read something, and you can open it up 2 days later and read the same thing, and it will mean something different to you. Because in the pages of this book, written through the fallible human being, is the truth of God. And if we don't look for it, we are never, ever going to live it. In our last disciple class, I asked the disciples, what is the secret of becoming a disciple? What is the secret of being a disciple? And they said great things: faith, courage, compassion, love, honor. The secret, though, is the willingness to learn. The willingness to learn from God every single day. Because I don't know, maybe you've noticed that some days God will have you going this way, and all of a sudden there is a great big brick wall there, and God says, go that way. And if you're not willing to learn that you can't just hit that brick wall over and over and over again, then truly you are not following the way that leads to life. So I hope everybody always wants to be in the midst of that Word. But there's something else that has to happen. You have to want it. You have to want to know what's in the book. You have to want to know what God said. You have to want to know the stories of Jesus beyond me telling them to the children down here in the front of the sanctuary each Sunday morning. And if you don't want it, then that's the place that I challenge you this week. Why is it that you don't want to know what's in the book? Why is it that you would just allow those of us who have paid to know the book to tell you what's in it? Our challenge is always, why is it that I don't want to know what's in those pages? Amen. We come